Okay, well, I'll just do a very short introduction. So welcome back, everybody, to our third presentation, third of four today. You have with us today Ellen Finkelstein, who's going to be talking about 9 techniques to make your presentations modern. And I've done interviews with Ellen in the past, and I know she's got just a wealth of information to share with you. And I'll leave it with you, Ellen, to go ahead and then just push the share button down below. And I'm going to turn my video and audio off so that you get the full attention.
Okay, thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. And I hear that the first 2 sessions were really excellent. So that's great. I'm glad that this is all going very well. And I just wanted to say that this came out of actually some consulting I did for a presenter who was presenting to millennials, and he wanted his presentation to look modern and not old-fashioned. And I'm one of those old-fashioned types, you know. So we came up with some principles, and then I made a blog post out of it, and I made a presentation out of it for you. So feel free to ask questions at any time. I will get my chat box open there. Is that where people are putting their questions? Maybe
yeah, primarily in the chat
okay.
is where they're doing questions. The occasional person's doing it in the Q&A area, so I'm trying to kind of keep an eye open on
okay.
Both.
Yeah,
but if you're going to watch the chat as well, I'll let you handle them as they come up.
Okay, great. So let's get started. You want your techniques, your training to look modern so that millennials don't think you're old. But even people, this applies even to young people, even to millennials who are presenters, who don't have a good sense, who aren't designers, who really have no clue what looks modern these days, because not everybody is really tuned into this, although designers are. So nobody wants to look out of date, even though these are what you would call retro, and they're kind of cool in a retro way. But in general, we don't want to look out of date. And even if you aren't a designer, you can create better looking slides with a little attention to some of these aspects of what's going on in design these days to improve your slides. And the reason I know you can do this is for something that happened to me. So I think it was 2004, there was a period of time, it was, well over 10 years ago, and I was writing a regular article in a magazine called Presentations Magazine. And I'm not a designer, I just want to start by telling you that. But I had already at that time written a couple of books on PowerPoint, and I was doing blog posts on PowerPoint. I was doing a lot with PowerPoint, and I was creating slides. So I wrote an article called PowerPoint or Presentations Without Bullets. And it was a great topic, the idea of not using bulleted text all throughout your slides. And I created an example of a slide without bullets. I used it as a screenshot, as a figure in the article. And the next month, this was a physical printed magazine that came out monthly. The next month, they published a letter to the editor that said, the slide was awful, referring to my article. It has no focus. Please give us better examples. And this is how I felt. This picture shows you how I felt. I was mortified. I had really, my whole business was, my whole livelihood was based around PowerPoint. And I had just been kind of called out so that people knew that I really didn't know what I was doing when it came to designing slides. And the books had been a little bit more technical about PowerPoint, not about design. But still, I really needed to be able to create good-looking slides. And I just felt mortified, like this pain in my heart. That, like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So I decided I needed to learn, that's basically that. And so what I started doing was going to a PowerPoint conference every year. It used to be called PowerPoint Live, and now it's called Presentation Summit. And this is Rick Altman who runs it. And I learned, there are designers there, some of my fellow PowerPoint MVPs who were there and who were good designers, and I learned from them. And I also read a lot of books. And so these are famous books in the presentation world, Beyond Bullet Points by Cliff Atkinson, and Presentation Zen by Gar Reynolds, Slideology by Nancy Duarte, Multimedia learning is not about PowerPoint at all. And it's more academic by Richard E. Mayer, but it's some research about what kind of learning works best, and it does apply to training when you're using PowerPoint. I also studied award-winning presentations, all of that kind of thing. And so I learned how to create good slides. And so I just want to make the point that if I can do it, you can do it. And maybe I could ask you in the chat, how many of you feel like you're artistically challenged? Like design is just not your thing, that's a difficult thing for you? So Melody says, nope, it means you're not artistically challenged. Okay, well, that's good. Good for you. So Michelle says, me. Okay, so usually when I do this in a presentation, when I ask this question, I usually get about 50-50. Some people, maybe they're drawn to designing slides because they have something. So presentation, but not good at design, often outsource or use things like Adobe Spark. Jesse says, I feel like it takes me a while to get there. I start out basic and then the artsy comes. I don't feel it comes naturally. So Jesse, that's a really good point. I really like that. So Lorna says, I love design, just struggle with the time to do it. Yes, it can be time consuming. But I'm going to show you some kind of quick, easy ways to do things. And I really wanted to go back to what Jesse said, that it takes you a while to get there. That after you pay attention to it, it will become easier for you. You don't need artistic ability to create good-looking slides. But I'm going to focus today on these 9 techniques to make your slides look more modern. So the first thing is to use a thin sans-serif font. And this is, and I'm going to explain in a minute why some of these techniques are considered modern. Design trends change. I will talk about some older trends as well later on. And so what's considered modern is not always the same. But right now, it's considered more modern to use something that's a thin font. And by a thin font, I mean the line is thin. So if you look at Calibri Light, compare it to Arial Black, then you'll see the difference between, a thin line and a thick line. So it's not the width of each letter so much. So, and Verdana is also, Verdana is a good point because it has a fairly thin line, but the letters are wide. Arial Narrow has narrow letters, but also a fairly narrow line to it. Serif fonts will always look more old-fashioned. Times New Roman, kind of relating it maybe to the New York Times or something like that. And it can sometimes be a little harder to read on screen, although it's considered easier to read in print on actual paper. And anytime you have questions, let me know. So let's talk about why. So the reason for this, at least part of the reason for it, it's really hard to know why trends change, but one of the reasons is that we're now seeing things on smaller screens. So in that picture, you see this man, he has a laptop, but he also has his cell phone next to him. And we're watching things on these small cell phone screens now. And small screens means there's room for fewer pixels. So things have gotten narrower. So that's why a lot of these changes have come about. So the reason why it might not be a good idea is that thin lines can be hard to read, especially with people with glasses like me and the guy in the picture, people of a certain age like me and the guy in the picture. So they can sometimes be hard to read. So this is the keyboard on my cell phone. It's a Samsung 5. And they've made a change in the operating system a couple of years ago, and they made everything thinner because to make it more modern looking. And I can no longer tell the difference between the apostrophe at the top of the V and the quotation mark at the top of the B. It's real. I have to take off my glasses. I don't know if you can see me in the webcam. I have to put my glasses down and go like this to tell the difference between the two. And it's very frustrating to me. And before that, those letters, the characters that are at the top, which are fainter and smaller, were thicker lines, and I could see it easily. And now I can no longer see it easily. So Garland says, yes, we still see your webcam. So anyway, that's what I have to do. So I want to caution you to be careful not to get too thin and too small, because some people will have trouble seeing it. So that's the first technique, to use a thin sans-serif font. Oh, I actually never talked very much about what sans-serif means. It just means it doesn't have little edges I'll go back in here and show you. So a sans-serif font, well, let me just tell you what a serif font is. Has these, like at the T here, it has little edges at the top at the T, or the G has a little line there, or at the top of the W here. So that's what a serif is. So sans-serif fonts are much cleaner and clearer. So that's what those are. Yeah. Okay, number 2, use thin borders and lines or none at all. So here you have some photographs. Some of them you've seen already, and they have a thick border on them. And you might think that it makes sense to use a thick border to kind of call it out and and it's true that when you want to focus attention on something, you want a thicker border will do that, especially a bright border like this. But if you have a number of pictures and they all have thick borders, you're not really calling anything out, and it does tend to look a little bit heavier and more old-fashioned. So just look at this carefully, and then look at the contrast. Here's a thin border, and here's no border. And you have to look and get an impression, because it's really hard for me to describe why this looks more modern. So you'll just kind of have to feel it. Myrna says, how concerned are you with standard fonts across platform, Mac and PC, for sharing, especially if you don't know the recipient's platform? Lorna says, I prefer no border. Yeah. So in a situation where you are, especially if you are designing presentations for other people to use and you don't know what they'll be using, then it's very important to have standard fonts that work across different platforms. And if you're interested, there is somebody who has a list of safe, web safe fonts, and I could get that to you. So you could email me afterwards, and I'll try to find that for you, because I don't have that right off the bat. But if you're going to be doing it, and another thing is that even if you create your presentation for yourself to present, if you're traveling, you might end up, you might create it on your PC, and you might end up doing it on a laptop, and if that doesn't work, somebody might give you their Mac, that kind of thing. So it can be an issue. And fonts especially render differently on different platforms. So even though something will show up, it might, if you have, let's say, text in a box, it might not fit in the box anymore, or it might wrap differently, so it might look pretty ugly. So, and Lorna says, another reason to use standard fonts is they work better on web conference sessions, which I run a lot. Yeah, so I think that's, again, the issue of, using it on another platform or something like that. Yeah, absolutely. So again, I just want to show you the differences. Here's a thick border, a thin border, and no border at all. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3, use a flat design. So I don't know how many of you remember what Web 2.0 was. It was a big deal. And it was all about reflections and highlights and shadows like that. So on these squares, at the very top of it, you can see this little lighter line it's called a highlight. And the whole thing makes each of these shapes look 3D. So they take up extra pixels. You could just have the inner part of it if you want instead, and so that would take up fewer pixels. Shadows are not flat. They're still often used. I read an article about design earlier this year that kind of said shadows were coming back because they have value to show a third dimension. But they were talking mostly about web design. Now, here on this screen, and maybe a couple of you are watching on your phone, it's possible, but if you're looking at, on a computer screen, there's certainly plenty of room for a couple of extra pixels. But nevertheless, this whole, what looks modern now is a flat design. And if you start researching this, you'll see that term flat used quite a lot. So instead of this, watch the difference. you would just have this. And again, it's just a matter of kind of feeling it, that this looks a little more old-fashioned now. This was in vogue in 2008 and 2009, let's say, which is actually quite a long time ago. And flat, which is, there was a period of time when things were changing, looks more modern now. So here's an example of a reflection. And it actually also has a little highlight at the top here, so it's like a 3D look. This is done in PowerPoint using a bevel, something called a bevel, and then it also has the reflection. But if instead you just do something like this, it will look more modern, even though it's a retro photo. So it's just the difference of a look, and that doesn't mean you won't sometimes want something a little over the top or elaborate or fancy, something like that. I would say modern design is not fancy. If I were to compare, I grew up in New York, so if I were to compare the Chrysler Building with the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building was built in this Art Deco style, which was very ornamental. I think it's actually very beautiful. Whereas the Empire State Building has cleaner lines. It doesn't have all that ornamentation on it. So these trends of being ornamental and simple have happened over, many times. That cycle has happened many times. But right now, things are simpler. So here you see it with a shadow, okay? And again, the shadow has I happen to like the shadow. It brings the picture off the slide as if it's, as if it's a separate piece of paper that's a little bit off the slide, but it does take extra pixels. Let's talk about colors. So Evelyn says, how about softening edges of photos minimally? Is that now outdated? To some extent, yes. I didn't talk about that, but yes. And again, in a flat look with fewer pixels and with, especially on something like a phone, it's harder to show. So the softening is done by, putting like a series of dots around the edge of the same color. And in smaller screens, it's hard to get that to look good, I think is what the problem is. And so this clean, crisp look will now look more modern. And again, I'm not telling you should never use that, but it will look more modern to have that crisp, clean edge for a photo. So look at the colors on the right and compare them to the colors on the left. And so the ones on the right are kind of pastel-y, and those will look a little bit more older and old-fashioned. The current colors, you'll see colors like this. You will see colors like this too. They'll be a little bit more, but you saw colors like that 20 years ago as well. They were kind of very, like these are the colors that a bank would use, very conservative colors, not very interesting. So the colors you see now are kind of more of these richer mid-range colors. And one of the differences that we see in PowerPoint slides is that using light colors, like the ones on the right, you'll need dark text on them, whereas on these colors on the left, or the ones in the middle, you'll need white, you'll put white text on them. So that's a big change. Garland says, I really like bold, bright colors myself, and Sydney says, me too, Garland. Yeah, I like these rich colors. In fact, these top two colors are the ones I chose for ellenfinkelstein.com. They're nice colors, but they're rich and they're interesting. I think that's the difference between the colors on the left and the colors in the middle. The ones in the middle are very conservative, but they're kind of boring, and the ones on the left are more interesting. Now, black is still in. We say, I don't know, black is the new whatever, something like that. There's a phrase like that. And black can still look very modern, but you'll want some contrasting colors that are interesting. And I, might have noticed that I use white backgrounds on my slides. So, white and black are both very crisp and clear. Black will be a little bit more stylish, I guess. It just isn't appropriate for everything. And I find when I'm showing text and content, I want a white background for that. Because it's a little bit more like a website or a book. I'm training, and black is a little bit more, I associate with, more with design and less with just putting the emphasis on the content. That's just, that's my opinion about it. Colors bring out a lot of emotions and feelings, and there's a whole psychology of color and the effects that colors have on people, and the differences between different countries, different parts of the world. For example, we know that in the United States, red has lots of different associations. So it's associated with financial loss. It's associated with Christmas and Valentine's Day. It's also associated with like a red light district. So that's like a lot of really different associations for the color red. But in China, women get married in red, and so it represents good fortune and happiness. So, and we don't have that association. In India, white is the color of mourning, and we don't have that association. So you do have to be aware of that, and also the fact that anytime I've read stuff about colors, you have to consider it but not be overtaken by it, because different people will react differently to different colors. So this was a presentation that I did for a dog kennel that does training. We were creating a video about dog training, and I wanted some of these more kind of colors like this on the left, and she said, "No, I need bright, happy colors, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about bright, happy dogs." As you can see in the picture, right? So, and I think the colors that they had on their website were this blue and this kind of pinky color. I don't know what you would call it. That's a dark pink. So another issue about color is branding. Lorna says, I need to be guided by corporate colors. So absolutely. And you'll see sometimes that that if you're doing presentations in-house or outside. So for example, if you're doing a sales presentation to another company, you might want to use their corporate colors rather than your corporate colors, because you might want to show them that you are customizing your presentation for them. And so again, corporate colors and branding is an important issue, but different people will use it in different ways. But I do find that people ignore branding a lot. So especially if you don't have corporate colors, you should still be aware of that. So I help a lot of people do sales presentations, and they have websites, and very often they don't even think that they should use the colors of their website, which is their branding colors, which they spent money to, have somebody design and come up with colors and so on like that. And also a design style, and they ignore that in a presentation, and they just pick up some PowerPoint template. And I think that's a big mistake, because people are going to go from your presentation to your website, and so there should be some congruence there. From Garland, he says, work for companies with cooler corporate colors, Lorena. She says, luckily I like our corporate colors. Good. That's a good thing. Okay. So number 5 is to use a lot of white space. And of course, if you're having a black background, that might be a lot of black space, but a lot of empty space. There's an expression, white space, but it doesn't necessarily have to be white. It could be a very light gray or a very dark blue or black, something like that. But the idea is to have a lot of white space. It took me a long time to figure out why I thought this was important. It definitely is a trend. You'll see it on websites. And by the way, a little tip is to look at websites and see how they change, especially, companies that have enough money to hire a good designer and keep up their branding that's important to them. So look at websites, and you will see trends in design, and you can use some of those trends on your slides as well. So I'm going to show you an example of one and then explain to you in terms of presenting and teaching and training and convincing people and so on like that, why white space is so important. But for now, just the fact that it looks modern, to have, it's a kind of minimalist type of look. And this is very similar to the idea of these clean lines that we were talking about, not having, having narrow fonts and having pictures without borders or thin borders, that kind of thing. So again, it's a kind of minimalist type of look. So here's the example. So this is the original example, and I want you to go, I'm going to go through this presentation, and you'll hear how it goes. And this is it's an awful slide. I mean, it's just an awful slide from so many points of view. But then I'm going to do it again, and you'll see why white space really helps, okay? So imagine you are now good, better, or even great at sales. What would be different in your life, okay? What would be possible? How much extra money could you make in a month if you were good, better, or great at sales? How much per year? How much over your lifetime? What will it cost you if you don't improve your sales skills? So there's so many things bad about this slide. One of the things is just the way the text comes in. So animating text, especially with this kind of dissolve and moving it, is really annoying to your audience. And it certainly isn't modern. And you can see, again, it's not crisp, it's not clean, but it also distracts your audience from what you're saying. So, and that has to do with the movement. It's not so much about being modern or anything like that. This is a principle that would be true in any way. It just has to do with how people learn and how the brain works. So I'm going to show you this again. Imagine you are now good, better, or even great at sales. What would be different in your life? What would be possible? How much extra money could you earn if you were good, better, or great at sales? How much per year? How much over your lifetime? What would it cost you? What will it cost you if you don't become great at sales? So, what's the difference between how you receive that information in the two slides? I'd like to hear your comments. Cindy says, death by PowerPoint. Yes, it's death by PowerPoint, lots of bullets and lots of things, but I'm interested in your experience of it, as understanding it. I'm listening more to you than trying to read and figure out the slides. So Jesse, that's just perfect. So that's exactly what it is. And when you don't put all the text on there, when you have all this white space, you're forced to listen to me, and instead of putting your attention on it. So the one I came up with this specific slide is the person who was doing this, he's a sales coach, and he wants you, the audience, to imagine something. But when your whole attention is looking at all of that text, there's no room in your brain to actually imagine. You can't think. All you're doing is reading and following all of that motion. So instead, you could choose a picture that evokes this concept of imagining your future, imagining what would happen if you were good, better, or great at sales. And of course, it has all this white space in the picture itself, not only on the left of the slide, so that it shows she's thinking, it implies that she's thinking about something, that there's nothing there for her to look at. So what is she looking at? She's thinking, she's imagining, okay? So the point is that when you have white space and less text, it looks more modern, but it also helps your audience understand your message because they have to listen to you. And in this case, it's even compounded by the specific message of asking you to imagine something that you really can't do with all of that text. So Melody, John says, Oh, Myrna says, so prefer not reading every single word on screen. John says, it gives me a feeling of using my imagination fully. Yes, exactly, exactly. You want to evoke that with the picture. You want to evoke the concept of using your imagination fully, exactly. Melody, of course, many presenters use the slides as speaker notes. They don't take the time to practice. That will always be an issue. Yes, it will always be an issue. And there's so many ways around it. There's presenter view. I don't have presenter view on my other screen because I have the Zoom chat there. But you could do that, and you can print out notes, and you can, and of course you can just practice. Yeah. What a concept. So let's go into the next one, which is to use large images. And again, you will see this in website design, but it's also very prominent in slides now. And I'll talk about large images in a minute, but just in images in general concept that images should have a purpose and don't decorate. So the purpose here, that's why I'm using the goal there, whatever that thing is called, with the arrow, the dart board. That's the purpose. The purpose is there. And the little flowers represent decoration. But this is one way of showing this slide with smaller images. So instead, you could do something like this. All images should have a purpose. And what is the purpose? Understanding, remembering, and persuasion. I'm taking the same photograph, but I'm just making it big. And this will always look more modern for you. So, that just making things big. And then decoration just distracts. So you'll notice that what I did was I took this slide, which has a lot of white space on it, doesn't have a lot of content on it, but I put it onto 2 slides. So I have all images should have a purpose, and decoration just distracts. I was invited to Trinidad to do a workshop there, and there was a doctor there, and he did presentations training nurses, and he put roses all around the edges of all of his slides because he thought it was pretty. And he loved it so much. He was so deflated when I felt bad, when I just told him, those roses are going to distract those nurses from understanding your business, but I like them. So it's hard. We can get attached to things, but we don't use images just to make a slide pretty. But also make them big, and that will make them look more modern. I have something called the Bear principle of how to choose the right images. This isn't so directly about looking modern or anything like that, but I think it's something that will be helpful for you. BEAR stands for big, arresting, relevant, and emotional, and it's my system for how to choose the right image. So we're going to go through a slide. And here's the slide. We all gain when you reach out to team members. So this would be our first iteration of it. It's 2 circles. They're reaching out to each other because they're overlapping. So that's the point. So the first principle is big, which I just talked about, using big images. So I could take that and make it bigger. And that will make it a better slide. Just by doing that, making it big will make it more modern, more clear, more memorable, all of that. More persuasive even. But there's another principle, arresting or attention getting, the A principle. So this is a big picture, and it's arresting, it's attention getting, right? So what the problem with this is it doesn't follow the third principle, which is relevant. So like, oops, I didn't mean this kind of reaching out, right? Yeah, so Cindy says it could be an HR violation, right? So this wasn't what we meant. So we want something big, we want something arresting, but it should also be relevant. So here's a picture. It's big. I think it's arresting. It's not very arresting, but the point of view of it is very unusual. So I think it's arresting, and it's very relevant because they are literally reaching out, working together. It's a team, that kind of thing. So this is a good picture, definitely. The last principle is emotional, which this doesn't have. And I know people sometimes feel uncomfortable using emotional images, and it does depend on your context and your audience, the environment where you work, and so on like that. But if you want to have an impact on people and really help people to remember what you're doing, anything that's emotional gets remembered more and longer. You can see that in your own life about the things that you remember. So we can take a picture that has all of these principles in it. So it's big, it's arresting, it's relevant, and it's emotional. So this is a picture of a team building exercise. And if you look at the pictures on their face, you know, they're competing with each other to get their team members up and so on like that. They're really trying hard and they're really working together and they're literally reaching out. You know, they have this guy over here who has his hand out there, you know, he's reaching out. This guy is helping somebody up. So to me, this epitomizes all four principles of big, arresting, relevant, and emotional. Okay. So Cindy says, love it. Yeah. So again, when you want to create a presentation that really has a high impact, adding emotional to it will help. Number 7 is use the edges of the slides for images. So look at the difference between this and this. I, again, have a hard time explaining why this looks more modern. But I think the way to look at it is that there are fewer edges. So here you see all 4 edges of the picture, and because there's the slide around it, there are these spaces around it, and so there are a lot of aspects to the whole layout of the slide. When you just simply move it to the edge of the slide, you have fewer edges, it's cleaner, and it will look more modern. I'm going to explain to you a very unusual way that I used this for a client. So it was a law firm, and the law firm was defending a doctor against a malpractice suit. And so he gave me slides that have pictures of the doctor's offices and equipment, and I said, but they were all in the center of the slide, you know, sort of done like this, but more in the center of the slide, you know, big pictures in the center of the slide. And I said, what's your purpose of showing these pictures? Is it to show that the offices are modern and his equipment is modern? And he said, yes, that was the reason he was going to show this to a jury. And, you know, that was his purpose for showing this, that he had, you know, modern equipment, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, so Lorna says, when the space is there, it looks like it's just been planked on the slide. Yeah, plunked onto the slide. Her arm is cut off for this picture. It's logical for it to be against the edge. Yes, so that's a good point. I don't like cut off body parts. So that's another point, yes. Good. So anyway, so I said to this lawyer, so then you should use modern design. Your design should follow your message. So his message is, this doctor has modern equipment, so we use modern design. So we took the pictures and we put them all again, you know, made them full slide or maybe something like this, so that it looked more modern. And that, in that case, the design follows the message. So here's another example, and you could do something like this. Just make it a full slide. And again, then you have no edges at all. And you have that same thing that you were talking about, you know, about them being cut off. So you don't have that problem. When it goes off the edge of the slide, it seems to make sense that they're cut off. You know, it doesn't seem just cut off. Okay. We're up to icons. Icons are really, can you hear me? Debbie says the sound is degrading. I haven't done anything different. Okay. Icons are really big these days. Sound okay here? Good. They are very in, as many of you might know. How many of you have Office 365 with the new icon features in PowerPoint? And they're also in Word and Excel. So I'm interested if you do have I wish somebody says yes to Office 365. Yes, okay. So several of you do. So in Office 365 and coming up soon, very soon, you can get PowerPoint 2019, which will incorporate many of the changes. Lorna says, nope, not yet, hopefully next year, as I would love to use the icon feature. So it includes icons. But you can get icons in many, many other places. So it's not like you can't find icons. But there's a difference between icons. So in each case, look at the difference between the left and the right. So we have a book, and the one on the left has lots more lines and little doodads and so on like that compared to the one on the right, which also has a lot of lines. It's trying to show the content of the book and the picture of the book, but yet it's much simpler. And again, look at the pencil on the left and the right. The one on the right looks more like a pen, I guess, but whatever it is. The one on the left just looks old-fashioned. It has a lot more lines and it's not as simple. The one on the right looks a lot more simple. The one on the left is a paintbrush and the one on the right is two paintbrushes. But again, look at the difference. And so I prefer the ones on the right. Cindy says, I use icons8.com, lots of choices. There are lots of places that you can go. Yeah. So the Noun Project has a bunch of them as well. I think you can also go to Pixabay and get some as well. Anyway, so the idea is clean icons, and that will make your presentations look more modern. So as we discussed, if you have Office 365, you have the new icon feature. You can see a pencil or a ruler or a paintbrush or a book. So one of the new phrases in presentation design is that icons are the new bullets. So I'm going to show, Evelyn says the icons on the right are simpler and cleaner, small nuances, but definitely makes a difference. Yes, exactly. And that's why I'm showing you both, you know, rather than just telling you. You have to see it and feel it, and then you become aware of it, and then you can apply it. So these, especially if you're not a designer, just becoming aware of these things really, really helps. So let's say we have a slide that talks about the three parts of a presentation: content, design, and delivery. So instead of this, you could do something like this. So we've turned bullet points into something much more modern, okay? And you can create something like this using smart art. There's a smart art that has boxes like this, and then breaking it up. And these are all from PowerPoint's icons. And in this case, I colored them to match the color of the boxes. And they have, you know, there's this white background that, you know, on the boxes, it's just white text on a box, but because of, you know, that this looks like holes in it. It almost looks like it's a hole in the box or something like that, as if it's cut out. It's kind of a cool look. But remember, I'm making them bigger, so when the icons first come in, they're a lot smaller than this. And by using the color this way, I'm matching the color, it also makes it kind of a little less, more modern looking. Again, it's hard for me to describe why, but the similarity of the colors here. You know, if I used three other colors, it would be more elaborate. And so by making it simpler, it looks more modern. So most icon places, somebody mentioned flat icon. Most icon places have free options. You can not download the premium ones. Definitely another good one, Melody. Yeah, Flat Iron and the Noun Project. Yeah, yeah. So, but anyway, it's really, and PowerPoint's icons or Office's icons, they have a few hundred, but they don't have a few thousand. And sometimes you can't find what you want. So no matter, even if you do have it, you will find sometimes needing to go out. So I had a slide where I wanted to talk about somebody using the stairs, and I could not find somebody walking up or down stairs. I absolutely could not find that. So I had to do a workaround. But icons will, like this, you know, compared to this. But even if I were to take this and turn it into smart art, by adding the icons like this and moving it, making it horizontal, makes the slide look much more modern. Simple icons are easier to eliminate backgrounds. Great shares, guys. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for coming up with all of these resources. That's great. wait for this one, guys. Of course, no ugly clip art. Are you watching? This is going to be a horrible experience. You're going to have nightmares. So, we all know about, Cindy says, ugh, yeah, I just yesterday when I was practicing this, I added the zoom to make it worse. But, but we all know about clip art and the horrors of clip art from the 1980s, maybe a little in the 1990s, maybe a little in the 1970s. But Clippy, have clip art and animated clip arts are even worse. Yeah, Clippy hate. Right. So, obviously you can stay away from this. It's silly, it's cute, and you almost never want to be silly or cute unless you're presenting to 3-year-olds. Then you want to be silly and cute. There's a place for almost everything, but when you're talking to adults or even high school students, then you want to stay away from that. I had fun finding this one. So we're up to number 9, and this one is to minimize text. And there's some overlap with lots of white space and big pictures and so on like that. And one of you brought up the whole thing about reading the text, and one of my examples, was a contrast that imagine you are now good, better, or great at sales, was kind of contrasting that as well. But I just wanted to say it in by itself to emphasize it, to minimize text. And so there are 2 things about it. We know people can't easily read and listen at the same time. This is a brain thing. And when you put the text up on the slide, people read it because it's there, and they're really not listening. Not only can't they read and listen at the same time, but they can read faster than you can speak. So they go ahead and read ahead while they're not listening to you. And then when they finish, they start listening to you. And then you're discussing stuff they've already read, so then they stop listening to you a second time. It's really a horrible cycle of not good presenting skills. So they kind of learn to ignore you. I have a niece who told me that when she was in college, by the first day, she could tell whether she had to actually attend class or not. So some of the teachers would put the focus on the textbook, and they would teach to the textbook, and they would tell you to read the textbook, and then they would pretty much repeat what you had read in class, and then they would test you on the textbook. And she said, but I could even tell before then. In the first class, I knew whether I needed to attend class or not. And so when she knew that she didn't have to attend class, she didn't attend class. She just read the textbook and took the tests, and she did fine on it. And just imagine how crazy that is. And we do this when we put up slides like this. We tell the audience that they don't really have to pay any attention. They can just, every time there's a new slide, they can just read through it and then go else, put their attention elsewhere. They can read it and then put their attention elsewhere. So we still know the text thing, Lorna says, is not good, and yet people still do it. Worst offenders are senior managers. Sad but true, Lorna, Cindy says. And Lorna says, I think the text issue happens because it takes, maybe it takes more time to select good images, something like that. I think some of these things are habit. That's true. And I think a good way of getting around it, especially if they're senior managers and it's hard for us to criticize them, is just to show them something else, and just not do the same thing. And not only do people see that from senior managers, but we see that, as I just described, we see that from college professors too. Professors who do this, and then you come out of college and you think that's the way to present. But the other thing is that people look at this, and even if it is good information, people get bored because it looks boring. So the combination of the fact that people can't read and listen at the same time, people get bored, that makes this not a good thing to do. So instead, let's see what else happening here. PowerPoint placeholders don't help insert text here. So yes, that's right. That's the default. And, sometimes people tell me Keynote is better, and I like to remind them that Keynote has the same default, so it's really not an issue of that. But you know what? I actually recommend that people use the title only layout, which says, put your title here, because it keeps things consistent. I find that people who are not designers, I have a lot of people who give me presentations, and what they did was they put text boxes on every slide, and every one of them is in a different size and a different place. And I would rather have them use the layouts, and then and even if they use the title and content, then I can turn the content into smart art, or I could divide it up into multiple slides with just using title only layout. So the title is still there, and then I add a picture. So I do like the concept of layouts, but you're right, people follow them too slavishly. Okay. So, instead of saying this, I could use the slides. It's a similar example to that sales presentation. That death by but people hate it when you put all the text on the slide. This is their reaction. They just don't like it. And do you want your audience to react like this? So I could talk about that same concept that I talked about before with this picture up here. And then again, I'm going to force you to listen to me. And who can forget this picture, right? It's like, I love this picture. Okay. So here are some examples again of slides that I've used in the past. When I talk about using images and visualizing concepts, I often use this slide. And I say, we know how images have become so much more prevalent. We know this from Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest and Instagram. Everywhere we go online, we now see pictures where, I'm old enough to remember when everything was text, because there was no such thing as pictures. But the speeding up of internet service, we have broadband now, makes it possible for us to put even high resolution pictures online. And they're so much more powerful that there's been this sea change that has gone on of this change from text to pictures. And I actually use a slide like this to talk about the difference between audio and video. So now you're seeing me. Hello, everybody. You can see me in the webcam, which is video, and this is going to be turned into a video, into a recording. But you could also, a long time ago, people just did audio because we couldn't do video so well online. And so this sea change is going on of things becoming more powerful and impactful and visual and realistic. So let's see what Cindy says. I use them sometimes. Other times I work with a blank canvas. If you can get good results with a blank canvas, I think that's good. But many people can't, who are more artistically challenged like me. Lorna says, I do think storytelling with imagery should go hand in hand with PowerPoint, because we've lost this, we've resorted to lots of text. Yes, and I think people know instinctively when they're telling a story that they don't put that story on the slide. When they're telling a story about something that happened to them, they don't put that there. But so we try to put the text that we put on is kind of the information part of it. But yes, and so that example, when I told the story of what happened to me when I wrote that magazine article, and I just used that one picture to show how I felt, because it was a picture of a woman, as if she was mortified, upset, embarrassed, or whatever it was, which was how I felt. And then I told the story with that picture. And so I think using pictures to tell stories is something that can be really powerful. And I also wanted to just briefly mention animation and how to use it. I have a whole lecture that I talk about animation and how to use it and how not to use it. And here's an example, by the way, where I've used a shadow to try to make this look like an old-fashioned, it's a retro kind of thing, the old-fashioned slides that we have put in carousels. Remember those, the slide projectors? So I've used it there. And I use this slide sometimes that what we need to do is we need to turn death by PowerPoint into Life by PowerPoint. So again, animation is a good example of, remember I said we don't use images to decorate? So animation can be used to just decorate. And there, if you're trying to give out information at that time, it will distract, rather than help people learn. So you can use fun animation on your first slide or your last slide when you're not really trying to give out information, you're just trying to get people's attention, make something beautiful, something like that. But the best use of animation when you're training or teaching is to show a process, to help people visualize a process. So, and to make it more memorable. So, it's like a dead tree, probably looks like a lot of trees in California right now. Turn death by PowerPoint into life by PowerPoint. And it helps people visualize, here it's so green and lush, and people can feel it. It has an emotional effect on people. And so that's a good way of using animation. So I have a simple process called the tell and show method, which basically means that you put a title on the slide, some text that actually tells your point, and then you show it. And it's just like the boy's book. So he has the text on one side, and then he has this big picture on the other side that shows it. So just tell it and show it, tell it and show it. And that will get the best result. And it will also result in a modern looking slides. So the corollary is just to put one point on a slide. Don't put what you say on the slide, and don't make people read and listen at the same time, just like we've discussed. Just say no to bullets. Smart art is your friend. You can turn text into a graphic. You have lots of options, and you can ungroup it twice for complete flexibility. So just, again, compare the left and the right. And you can see how much more modern it looks on the right, using those kinds of mid-range colors, and it's just much more graphic and simple. So here's another way of doing it, just another look. Again, I'm using a very big icon, but this is another example of smart art. It's one I happen to like a lot because it's so simple. People don't even realize that's smart art. Okay, so basically, those are the points. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm here to answer any questions that you want. And here's my contact information, my business phone number, my website. So anything you want to contact me if you have any questions about making your slides more modern and more memorable and more effective for your audience. So Lorna says, great points, Ellen. Jesse says, awesome presentation as always. I get great new tips every time I attend one of them. Thank you. Well, thank you, Jesse. Very kind of you. Myrna says, thanks, Ellen. Garland is coming back on. Hi. Always enjoy your webinars and tips. Thanks, Ellen. Thank you. Good information. Thank you. Excellent. And again, if you have any questions, just let me know. Contact me.
Thanks, Ellen. That was fantastic.
Oh, good. I'm glad you liked it.
Any final questions from anybody?
Thanks, Ellen. I missed the first half because I couldn't access Hope to review it later. Yeah, well, if you only got 4 or 5 of the 9 points, you definitely want to review it. Very helpful, not dry, good. Trying not to be dry. Here's my water so I can stay wet.
And we are recording these and hope to be able to share them with people afterwards, barring technical glitches. So
Great.